Our story starts in Cody, Wyoming. Cody has got to be the only airport that I've ever landed at where bears are important. When you go through security, one of the first things that they do is you see a box for your bear spray. If you happen to be carrying some bear spray deterrent with you, you're supposed to deposit it there. Also, they have a sign that tells you exactly what the differences are between grizzly bears and black bears so that you know the difference and you can stay out of trouble. In Cody, we stayed at the Irma Hotel. The Irma Hotel was founded by Buffalo Bill Cody. As a matter of fact, the entire city of Cody was named after Buffalo Bill, and he basically founded it. Irma was the name of his daughter. He named the hotel apparently after her. I was down at Redstone Arsenal telling Bruce Jones that I was going to be going out to Cody, and he told me that his grandfather used to have a ranch just outside of Cody. Now, as he got older, he sold the ranch apparently and moved into town. And Bruce Jones was telling me that his Grandpa Jones one time got, I guess, pretty intoxicated, and he got on his horse and he rode into the Irma Hotel and shot the place up. Well, when we got to the Irma Hotel, we asked the people that work there about whether or not there were any bullet holes, because we wanted to check and see whether or not we could find Bruce Jones's grandfather's bullet holes where he had shot the place up. And they told us that when they remodeled a number of years ago, there were a lot of bullet holes in the ceiling. Those got patched up and covered over, and you can't see them today. But there is one remaining bullet hole which is still visible, and it's in the bar here, as opposed to in the ceiling. Down at the end of that scroll work, you're going to see a dark spot. And where that dark spot is, there had been a bullet hole that had been patched. We also asked them about any Buffalo Bill stories that they happen to know about, and they told us that one day Buffalo Bill and his friends were sitting around the hotel, and they noticed that there was a bank robbery about ready to take place, or taking place at the bank next door. And they got their guns and they went out there to stop the bank robbers. Unfortunately, just as they were getting close enough to them, school let out, and a bunch of school children came out and filled up the area, and they got in between Buffalo Bill and his friends and the bank robbers, and Buffalo Bill and his friends, of course, couldn't shoot, and the bank robbers got away. Over the course of his life, Buffalo Bill had a lot of different occupations. One of these was driving stagecoach for tourists going to Yellowstone. Now, back in those days, most of the tourists started their trip in the north instead of in the east as we did. In the north is the little city called Gardner, and Gardner, Montana is the main location to enter the park, or at least traditionally it has been the main location to enter the park. Among other things, that it's at a lower altitude, and the temperatures there tend to be a little bit warmer and more comfortable. It's at that main entrance gate where you find the classic Yellowstone arch that you often see depicted. The Yellowstone arch was put up shortly after the national park was founded.
Yellowstone Park. We've come to the entry, and Yellowstone got its name from the nearby river, and the river got its name from the early trappers. When they came here, they saw little yellow stones in the river, and so that's what they named the river, and that's what they named the park.
Yellowstone Park is 3,472 square miles. It's 2.2 million acres. Delaware and Connecticut would fit into it. The elevation, the average elevation is 8,000 feet.
Okay.
Yellowstone National Park was first discovered, for as far as we know, by John Coulter. Now, John Coulter was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition. The Lewis and Clark expedition itself never actually made it up here. But John Coulter did, and he saw a little bit of the park. Mountain men came up here afterwards, like Jim Bridger, but they didn't see very much of the park either. Most of the area lay pretty much undiscovered by most of the European folks anyway, up until the time of the Washburn expedition in 1870. The Washburn expedition came up here to survey the area and to see what the best use of the property would be. Now, there was a person that was a part of the Washburn expedition by the name of Cornelius Hedges. And Cornelius Hedges was a Montana lawyer. And he's the one that first suggested that this ought to be set aside for public use. And 2 years later, in 1872, Congress followed his suggestion and made this the first national park in the world. People usually come to the park for one of three reasons. Either they're interested in simply looking at the terrain, and the terrain here is very interesting. There's lots of waterfalls and gorges and such. Or they might come here looking for animals, and there are a wide variety of animals that live in the park area. Or the third reason could potentially be that they're interested in the thermal events that occur in the park, and we're going to talk about each one of those possible reasons for coming to the park. One of the largest natural elements of the terrain is Yellowstone Lake itself. Yellowstone Lake, and it has gone by several different names over the past century. Yellowstone Lake is the highest alpine lake of this size in the United States. It's the largest lake at this altitude in the United States. It's 300 or 400 feet deep, depending on exactly where you are. The lake covers 132 square miles. Often people are very interested in the mini waterfalls that are in Yellowstone. The one that you're looking at here is the one called Tower Falls in the Roosevelt area. Tower Falls is by no means the largest falls or the most spectacular, but it is a pretty little falls. Tower Falls drops 132 feet. These next two little waterfalls are on the Firehole and Gibbon rivers. I'm going to be talking about the Firehole more later on when we're talking about the thermal events, because it's an important location for those. Perhaps the most major terrain event in Yellowstone is the 20-mile long Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, which has been carved out by the Yellowstone River. And it has two major waterfalls. One is 109 feet, and the other is an impressive 308 feet. Originally, wildlife was not a big draw for tourists at Yellowstone, but as things have changed, it's becoming an important draw nowadays. You can see such common things as woodpeckers and chipmunks and ravens, if you like, for example.
Yeah, but it was...
Isn't it cute?
I'm not afraid.
He's gone.
No, he's right there.
Maybe I need a picture for
He's eating off the food.
my wildlife picture.
We saw some goats up on a hill. The picture that as it starts out is from far, far away, and it's hard to hold the camera still. But it's not very long before the goats get tired of sitting where they are, and they actually come right down to the road where we are. As a matter of fact, where lots of people are.
One's moving down the hillside. They mountain goats?
There are some 50 or 60 pairs of osprey in the park, and this is one of them. Here we have some mule deer. This is the way you expect to find the American bison, or buffalo if you prefer, a long distance away. They're a 3,000-pound animal and they can be quite dangerous. But the park has something around 4,000 of these things. And so the fact of the matter is, seeing them from a long way away is not the only way that you see those buffalo. Bison usually go into the rut in about August, and they're quite dangerous at that time. They're willing to butt heads with just about anything, including people. Bison were, of course, nearly on the brink of extinction not too many years ago. The fact of the matter is that Yellowstone was the repository for virtually the last remaining wild American bison. There were only a few left, but that few has grown into a fairly good sized herd, as you can see. Apparently a major pastime for buffalo is rolling in the dust. I assume that helps to keep down parasites. Predators are usually difficult to see at the park, but we caught this coyote. Well, like the buffalo, the elk at this time of the year were starting to come into the rut. And so the males were out trying to gather up their girls as best as they could, practicing their bugling, and of course there was a certain amount of headbutting involved in this too. Elk stand about 6 feet tall at the shoulders, and they weigh about 1,000 pounds. They were named after what we would refer to as moose, the kind of animal that they had in Europe. But when the Europeans saw the elk, they had no idea what to call it, so they called it an elk after what we would have called a moose in Europe. As a result of the confusion, some people are resorting to the Indian word for elk, wapiti. Here's some half-hearted jousting, actually in town by a couple of young males. I think that they're just learning the ropes on how to go about doing this sort of thing. I think that as a result of the park rules, some of the animals have developed a rather disrespectful attitude towards people. The animals have the right-of-way everywhere, including on all the major highways, and they know it.
They don't care.
Well, I think they're pretty confident as long as the vehicles are not really particularly large. Over.
The park's traffic laws have a maximum speed limit of 45 miles an hour, but despite that, and that assumes that you can go 45 miles an hour with the traffic conditions, but despite that, they say that they lose about 100 animals a year to traffic accidents. Sometimes traffic conditions were simply miserable.
That's pretty good.
Take care of those babies.
Yeah, they put them in the middle. We've got older ones in front and older ones in the back. And there's somebody butting one of the little ones in the rump and saying, move along.
One morning when I got up before dawn, I got out of the cabin and I saw on the ridge above the cabin an elk bugling away. It was wonderful. But when Congress authorized the park, it authorized the park because of the thermal activity that was there, the hot springs and geysers and such. And so that's what's brought most people to Yellowstone. It's not so much the wildlife or the other terrain features, it's the thermals. There are several different kinds of thermals. First, there are hot springs. Now, these hot springs usually have colors in them, and these colors usually come from suspended mineral particles that are precipitated out, or large communities of microscopic organisms of one kind or another, bacteria or some such thing. The water here is very hot. It's often boiling. Now, boiling at sea level means 212 degrees Fahrenheit. But at this elevation, it might actually be less than 200 degrees. These are some of the examples of colors that you can find in hot springs because of the algae, bacteria, minerals, and other things. Now, a fumarole is different. A fumarole is basically water vapor and other gases being expelled from holes in the ground. It's a kind of a steam vent, or sometimes called a dry geyser. That's a fumarole. Often this is so forceful that the ground can tremble and produce strong roaring noises like thunder. half of Yellowstone is covered with fumaroles. Mud pots, on the other hand, are acidic hot springs with a limited water supply. Some microorganisms use hydrogen sulfide, which arises from deep within the earth, as an energy source, and they help to convert the smelly gas to sulfuric acid, which breaks down the rock into clay. Various gases escape through the wet clay mud and cause it to bubble. The mud pot activity varies a little bit with the seasons and the amount of precipitation. This is the white domed geyser. It goes off every 12 to 24 minutes, and it's about due to go off again. Now, geysers are another type of hot spring. This time there's some kind of constriction, however, in its plumbing. A geyser periodically erupts violently as pressure mounts in the large volume of hot water stored deep beneath the surface. Now, some geysers erupt every minute, while others are inactive for months or years or even decades. The park has more than 300 geysers, and each continues to change its pattern of activity. This geyser is located just a few miles north of Old Faithful. Geysers tend not to be terribly faithful. They vary a great deal as to when they're going to go off. Most geysers are not like this one, and Old Faithful will go off on any kind of a regular schedule. Sometimes they will erupt many times a year, and other times they will not erupt for decades. And when they do erupt, you can't really tell how long the eruption is going to be in most cases. It could be just a few seconds, or it could be many hours, perhaps even days while the eruption is going on. Next, we see a map of Yellowstone National Park. In the upper left-hand corner, that's where Mammoth Hot Springs are located, and of course that's the most famous hot springs in the park. Colors in the water can tell you a little bit about the content. Blue water would be a reflection of the color of the sky, but to the extent that the water is green, it may be affected by sulfur, yellow added to the blue, or there could be a certain amount of algae in the water. If there is white precipitate, that's usually an indication of some kind of mineral. In addition, other colors can be caused by various kinds of bacteria and algae. Mammoth Hot Springs was the area of the park that was first developed. As a matter of fact, it was first developed even before it was a national park. It was developed as a hot water bathing area, sort of a resort for the local miners and such. But with the coming of the park officials began to focus their headquarters efforts at the Mammoth Hot Springs. The reason is because it was near the railhead of Gardner, Montana, and in addition to being near the railhead, this was also the part of the park that was the warmest, because although it's in the north, it was at the lowest elevation. The temperatures further inside the park can easily be as much as 15 degrees or more colder, and in this particular climate, warm is important. Because this was the first national park in the world, really, no one had any idea how to administer it. In the beginning, there was a great deal of trouble with poaching and damage to the monuments, and there weren't very many people there to protect it. As a matter of fact, there wasn't really anyone there until the U.S. cavalry came in with a few hundred troops. Initially, the U.S. cavalry came in with only 50, but over a period of years, they established a permanent fort and brought their numbers up to about 350. And eventually, they did manage to suppress the poaching, and they managed to correct the damage done to, the rate of the damage done to the monuments, at least to some extent. In addition, they discovered that they needed to have a law and order out there in order to help their police function, and they arranged for a judge to be sent out to the park to stay there permanently with them and adjudicate cases. Eventually, the U.S. cavalry presence at Yellowstone National Park was replaced by the park rangers. As a matter of fact, the first park rangers were U.S. cavalry troopers that volunteered for the conversion. Some of the first permanent buildings at Yellowstone National Park were U.S. military buildings. They were called Fort Yellowstone, as you see here. Fort Yellowstone was eventually turned over to the National Park Service, and today it is used by the National Park Service for its own personnel. The BOQ has become the visitor center. The chapel remains as a chapel. The barracks are used for offices, and the officers' quarters continue to be used by the park officials for them and their families. This is the old barracks, now used for offices for the National Park Service. Seeing as though we were at Fort Yellowstone, I thought it'd be a nice idea to take a horse ride, so we all took off one morning and went on a short ride. I suppose the most amazing thing about that ride was that everybody came back in good condition.
Let's go see the old geysers. No, not us.
The most famous geyser in the park is Old Faithful, and Old Faithful is south of the Mammoth Hot Springs. Of the approximately 10,000 hydrothermal features in the park, clearly the best known is Old Faithful. It puts out thousands of gallons of steaming water, thundering into the sky with each eruption. Old Faithful has rarely missed its eruptions during its 120 years of observation. While we were there, the geyser was erupting about every 88 minutes, but it varies between about an hour and 3 hours in between eruptions. Geologists say that underneath Old Faithful, deep in the earth, there's a chamber about the size of a bus. And then there's a narrow neck leading up from that chamber into another chamber which is about the size of a car. And then that's followed by another narrow neck to the surface. It's this double chambered effect that apparently has an impact on exactly how and why Old Faithful erupts. Yellowstone has about 60% of the world's geysers. There's 102 of them. The fact of the matter is that only Iceland and New Zealand come close to having the number of geysers that you find concentrated at Yellowstone National Park. What drives all of the Yellowstone thermal activity, of course, is a magma chamber, a hot spot in the earth. A magma chamber only about 4 miles beneath the surface of the earth, as opposed to the 25 or 30 miles that it usually is. This thin crust above the magma chamber is fractured in many different places, and water trickles down into it. The magma chamber in this particular location is about 40 miles wide. The water running off from Old Faithful to the Firehole River. Now, the Firehole River got its name from an interesting occurrence. When the early trappers went to Yellowstone, they saw the steam coming up from the fumaroles, and they thought that that steam was smoke from a fire, and that's how the Firehole River got its name. Old Faithful is not the largest geyser. The largest geyser is Steamboat, which is about halfway between Old Faithful and Mammoth Hot Springs. This happens to be Steamboat. Steamboat erupts on a very irregular basis. The last major eruption was May 23rd. However, there have been periods of time when it has gone for decades without erupting, although more typically it erupts a couple of times a year. When Steamboat does give a major eruption, it can go up 300 or 400 feet. Now, that's what Old Faithful can get. This next geyser is Clepsydra, but it's a special kind of geyser. This geyser is a fountain. The difference between a regular geyser and a fountain geyser has to do with the way that the nozzle is shaped. The geyser doesn't have to go straight up or in any particular defined direction. That is, it can go in multiple different directions as it goes off. And so the effect is more like seeing a city fountain with bursts of water going off in several different directions at several different times. This makes a really nice display, and in many ways it was more attractive than any of the other geysers, including Old Faithful.
Most of Yellowstone is covered by a large volcanic caldera. That's what causes all the thermal works. Now this caldera is about 50 miles long and about 20 miles wide. The magma is only about 4 miles from the surface, and that's what gives you all the heat to run all the thermal activity.
The magma heats the crust, and snow melts above and flows through the fissures down towards where the magma, the runoff is heated and expands, and eventually it's pushed back to the surface. Yellowstone National Park gives off 30 times more heat than any place else in the Rocky Mountains. In addition, it's seismically active and has 25 earthquakes a week. That's more than any place in the United States outside of California.
The last major eruption, represented by that caldera, was about 600,000 years ago. Now, it's not been the only eruption. That eruption, the one 600,000 years ago, was roughly equivalent to about 1,000 Mount St. Helens eruptions.
This is a map of that most recent volcanic eruption caldera, the way that it still exists in the park.
But there was another one about 1.4 million years ago, and one even before that about 2 million years ago. And those were as much as 2,500 times the force of Mount St. Helens.
These maps show the extent of the older eruptions of the caldera. Now this scenery is pretty, but there's another way we want to show it to you, and that will become apparent in a few minutes. The river has worn away some of the earth and exposed the history of the continent. Look at those vertical columns that are all in a row near the top of the valley. That's basalt, and that basalt was laid down in the 1.4 million year ago. That's 25 feet thick. And those three eruptions at the Yellowstone area are not the only eruptions that have ever occurred from this hotspot. This hotspot has been slowly drifting to the northeast for millions and millions of years, as you can see here. 12 million years ago, the hotspot was in Idaho, and 20 million years from now, perhaps it will be in Canada.
Come to think of it, every 600,000 or 700,000 years they seem to have an eruption. The last one was 600,000 years ago. We're about due for another one. We better hurry. ahead, go again.
Okay. Yellowstone Park is 3,472 square miles, which would equal about 2,002,002 square acres.
2.2 million square acres.
Okay. All
Let's
right.
start
I'm going to
again?
do it again.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yellowstone Park is 3,472 square acres. It would...
Square miles.
Oh, gee. Okay. Yellowstone Park, let's wait.
Okay, you can go now.
Yellowstone Park is 3,372 square miles, which would equal 2.2 million acres. Connecticut and Delaware would both fit into Yellowstone Park. The elevation is 8,000 feet.